Hey everybody, and welcome to the JavaScript Jabber Show. This week on our panel we have Cory House.
Coming at you from sunny Kansas City.
Aimee Knight.
Hello from Nashville.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we have a special guest, and that's Surma from Google. You want to introduce yourself?
So I'm Surma. I am working on the Chrome DevRel team for Google, and I'm a part of the team that is based in London, although we're as DevRel all over the world. And I have been working on anything that has to do with web app performance, both the runtime performance as well as loading. And that kind of got me also working on HTTP2 and interactions and UX and spec work. And that's kind of my thing.
Very cool. And we've had Ilya Grigorik on Ruby Rogues, and that's how we got in contact with you.
Exactly. Yeah, he forwarded your request to me, and even though I failed to respond the first time, I finally made it, and I'm very happy to be here.
Awesome. So for those that don't know, do you want to kind of explain what the HTTP protocol is and what HTTP2, what the difference is? Are you trying to figure out how to stay current with Ruby and Rails? I'm putting on a 2-day online conference called Ruby Remote Conf. You can check it out at rubyremoteconf.com. Like I said, it's a 2-day conference where you can come and listen to speakers and experts from all around the world talk to you about issues pertaining to Ruby and web development. We have an online Slack channel, a roundtable discussion on Zoom, and all of the talks are given over Google Hangouts, and all of the talks will be streamed to you live. Come check us out at rubyremoteconf.com.
Yeah, I can try to not go into a whole 1-hour talk right now and just keep it brief. So HTTP is probably, even as a non-developer, something that you have seen in the browser, because that's usually what is in front of the address bar, where it says HTTP:// and sometimes it's HTTPS. But that is the protocol that we have been using since the 90s, basically, to talk to web servers and to request files that we then download and display as a website onto our display. And with this protocol, we transfer HTML, we transfer JavaScript files, we transfer CSS files, and the browser then combines all these into the web page that you see. And as I said, we've been using this since the early 90s, which is where HTTP 1.0 came out. Quickly after, I think in 1995, is where they upgraded HTTP a little bit to HTTP 1.1 because they realized that some decisions that they made were not really well suited for the way the web was being used, and did some things like they added a bit of caching, they allowed more control over how a connection should be reused, all these kind of things. But more or less still the same protocol, text-based, human-readable. And we've gotten pretty far with it, although we have had developers take a few workarounds and shortcuts to use it in the modern day, despite some shortcomings. And at some point, people sat down and rethought the protocol thought about the shortcomings, the pain points of the current way that HTTP is being used and how it could be addressed on the protocol level. And I think it was mostly engineers at Google who came up with a protocol called Speedy. And they kind of launched that in Chrome just to see how it would affect delivered statistics in terms of like time to the first paint, how fast can multiple requests be handled by the server side? Is it more strain on the CPU? Could it be compressed better? All these kind of things they evaluated. It turns out it was much better because in the 90s, it was designed for something completely different, for static documents with a few images and headlines, while now we do more like apps with multiple megabytes of images and JavaScript and dynamic content and all these kind of things. And after playing around with Speedy for a while, they tried to standardize it, and that's basically the foundation that they use to what is now the HTTP2 spec, the next iteration of HTTP. And while it is backwards compatible, it brings, if the browser has support, which all browsers by now basically do, it brings so many new features or so many different approaches to the file delivery problem that web developers have to think very differently about how to write their web apps, or at least can stop doing some of the weird things they had to do with HTTP 1. I think that is a short version of the entire thing.
So I was setting up Nginx the other day, and it had an HTTP2 flag in it. So what is that doing for me then on my web server? Like, what difference am I going to see, or am I not going to see any difference?
So I've been giving a few talks about HTTP2, and basically I usually start and end my talks with, if you want to leave now, just enable HTTP2 and you will get better performance. Because that's pretty much what it is. If you don't touch anything, you just keep doing what you're doing, you do the same build pipeline, you have your gulp tasks and whatnot, and all that set up, and you just enable HTTP2 on your Nginx, on your Apache, or whatever you're using, you should see a 20, 30, 40, 50% improvement in loading time. And that is due to multiple things that are happening. So one of the biggest things that is happened with HTTP2 is the problem of head-of-line blocking is gone. Well, so one of the issues by design in HTTP1 was that if you sent out a request, you had this connection, you sent out a request, and that connection couldn't do anything else until the point where the response from the server came back. So there's usually a lot of dead time, because you have the whole round trip, like 100 milliseconds, the request goes to the server, is being processed on the server side, and then the server sends a response back. This is dead time. And by design, because the protocol was designed this way, there's nothing you can do about that. And that ends up costing you 150, 200 milliseconds, depending on connection and geographical distance of the server per request. And that is not good. And what they did in the old times is they allowed you to have up to 6 connections in parallel, but that's only 6. And if you think about how websites are usually written nowadays, that you get the index HTML, and the index HTML references like 4 CSS file and 8 JavaScript files, you get to feel that limit of 6 connections very, very quickly. And HTTP2 doesn't have it anymore. So on HTTP2, you only have one single connection. And all these requests and responses basically share that one connection, or being multiplexed onto that single connection. So if one request is done sending and just waiting for the answer, another request can take over the connection and just continue sending and utilizing the bandwidth that is available, which most of the time, on average, gives you 30% speed up in terms of loading time. And that's probably the biggest thing. And as a result of that, head-of-line blocking is the biggest reason why we have practices like bundling and image spriting, and basically reducing the number of requests by packing multiple resources into one file. And even though you shouldn't have your website go into like having 1 million files, you can now stop the bundling and the spriting thing unless you have a really big number of assets. But in general, you can probably stop doing the bundling and make better use of caching, because now you can use per file caching, because HTTP2 can handle multiple requests much, much better than HTTP1 could. So if you just enabled Nginx to use HTTP2, you did the right thing.
Yay, the right thing for me.
So I've heard some mixed advice on exactly what front-end developers should do when they're working in HTTP2. Some people have really tried to simplify it down to say that bundling all your assets into a single file is now an anti-pattern. And I get the impression that that is true, that in HTTP2 that you're better off splitting into many separate bundles for performance so that you can get those benefits. Because effectively, if I deliver a single bundle, I'm really missing out on some of the core benefits of HTTP2. Is that correct?
Yes, and also some core benefits of HTTP1. So having everything in one big bundle is definitely an anti-pattern, because one of the big issues is that this bundle is usually very big. Like, we're probably talking about 500, 600K, probably much more on the average website. And the point is that if you update your website, even 1 byte change will completely invalidate that big bundle. So if the user revisits the website, they have to re-download the entire bundle. While if you have all your files separate, they only need to re-download the one file that changed, which is probably much, much smaller. And that's a benefit that's actually already in HTTP1 caching, but due to the best practice of bundling, it could never be really used.
So can I ask really quickly then, what about people with older browsers? Or I guess the other way of asking this is, do most of the evergreen browsers we see now, with Firefox and Chrome and Edge, do they all support HTTP2 then, so that we can just not worry about this anymore if people have updated browsers?
Yes. So in general, so there's multiple things here. In general, the answer is yes. All the evergreen browsers do support HTTP2. I usually say if you have a very specific target group, just look at Can I Use. You can actually, what I didn't know until I learned about this, is that you can upload your Google Analytics file or your data to caniuse.com, and it gives you statistics, what features on your specific visitor group is available. So, for example, if you were an India-based company with a very exclusively Indian demographic, that is one of the rare instances where you probably shouldn't switch to HTTP2 just yet, because the UC browser is very, very popular over there, and it's one of the only browsers that doesn't have support for HTTP2. Pretty much all the other ones do. If I'm not mistaken, even Edge has HTTP2 support. I'm trying to verify this now real quick. Yeah, even Edge had support with Windows 10, not on Windows 8. But, it's kind of there. And one of the things that's probably important to make clear is that HTTP2 is backwards compatible. So if a browser doesn't support HTTP2, the server is required by spec to fall back to HTTP1, or it's actually the other way around. Technically, HTTP2 is a protocol upgrade from HTTP1. That means that, of course, if you have optimized your website to HTTP2, that it will be slower and less performant than HTTP1 in terms of loading. But on average, the amount of users that get the HTTP1 experience should be very, very small, if not completely neglectable.
What about on mobile devices?
It applies the same to mobile devices, except I think Opera Mini. All browsers have support for HTTP2.
Cool. Sorry I interrupted you. You were saying something else, but I don't know if we remember what that was.
I don't remember either. Couldn't have been that important. But yeah, basically this is the biggest one I would cover. I think the global average right now is about 85% have support for HTTP2. If you exclude India, it gets even higher. So so at this point, I would say it is probably not worth your time optimizing for the 10% who don't have support for HTTP2.
So it sounds like so far it's, don't use the build tools that put it all into one giant file and then tell ops to enable HTTP2. Is there other practical advice for JavaScript developers?
For JavaScript developers as a node, or just like web developers who do JavaScript?
Either one.
So one of the things that some people do, which I think is an easy thing to try into, is that they start setting up HTTP2 on the web server that you usually spawn with your app, like if you do node development. But most of the time, so one thing, actually, I think I didn't mention at all, is that HTTP2 is always encrypted. So you always need a certificate with HTTP2. There is technically a spec for a clear text version of HTTP2, but all the browsers have opted out of implementing that, which is one of the ways that they're trying to push HTTPS forward, that all sites should be encrypted by default. And since Let's Encrypt is there to just give you free certificates, I don't think that is too much to ask at this point. So you will have to have HTTPS set up. And that is one of the reasons why when you're actually deploying an app, you probably want HTTP2 to be terminated at the load balancer stage and not be used to communicate between your individual instances of your app. Basically the same that you would do when you had normal TLS, that you would terminate the TLS encryption at the load balancer and just have normal HTTP1 behind the edge and the backend to talk to between the instances. So if you'd want to do HTTP2, unless you do static hosting, you probably don't want to set up an HTTP2 server yourself, but just put a load balancer in front of it, or just use anything that already has configured for you. For JavaScript developers, it shouldn't be any different, except if you, for some reason, somehow rely on your module bundler to do things for you, because now these files are probably separate, which is a good thing. But something that you should be aware of, because they're now not bundled anymore. So I guess one of the very few benefits of the bundling was that you did a request for that bundle, and you would know that all the dependencies you could possibly need are now available because they were all bundled together in that single file. Now it's a little bit different, because when you request something, it will only respond with the exact thing you requested, and that might have dependencies which will spawn additional requests. And there's two things that you can do about them and that you probably should do about them. The more safe version for now is to use link preload headers or link preload meta tags, which once the browser encounters them, instructs the browser to go ahead and fetch that resource, because you're basically guaranteeing to the browser that these resources are going to be needed later on. And then there's the even more, the newer version, the more bleeding edge version of using HTTP2 push. And that's actually super interesting, because what it allows you to do is, from the server side, if a request for index.html comes in, the server can then go and say, you just requested index.html, so I'm pretty sure you're going to request the app.css and the app.js file, so I'm going to just give those back to you as well, even though you haven't even requested them yet. And that basically puts them in the browser's cache, even though it's not completely true, but it makes them available on the browser side. So if the browser wants to go up and fetch them, it can already stop, because they're already there in memory cache, and just grab them and use them on the page, which shaves off a lot of loading time, because again, round time trips are about 150 milliseconds or something. So that saves a lot of time while loading. The guidance here is still somewhat developing, because HTTP push is still newer than HTTP2 itself, or it wasn't implemented at the same stage as HTTP2. So lots of browsers just started with HTTP2 without the push support and are now pulling up push. But one of the patterns we've been advocating a lot for is called the purple pattern, and that's probably something I should explain later, but I don't want to derail everything. So I hope that answered your question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. I keep interrupting with questions, though, so I'm going to let somebody else ask.
So I just want to get back to the whole having servers using HTTP2. I mean, you talked about that a little bit, but like if I am a Node dev, a .NET dev, a Java dev, and I'm at a small enough shop that either I'm full stack and I'm dealing with the server and putting that together, how do I go about getting this? Getting HTTP going for my site? Or what about, is there hosting facilities out there that are most of the public hosting facilities out there, like any of the common ones, are they using HTTP already?
As far as I know, most of the infrastructure as a service companies do offer HTTP2. So I know that Google Cloud Platform does HTTP2 also for custom domains if you have a TLS certificate for it. I'm pretty sure AWS does the same. I know it for their S3 buckets. I'm not so sure about their bare metal offering, basically. One of the things you can always do is to use the free offering of Cloudflare as a CDN, because they basically just give you a certificate and HTTP2 for free, which makes a lot of sense, because it should only be used from on the edge server, so as a CDN layer, because it makes the transferring of the file so much faster. So I personally mostly use it right now, or use HTTP2 by using Cloudflare, which is really, really convenient. Yeah, but basically what I meant earlier is that you should just keep an eye out on the fact that you don't want to use HTTP2 to talk between your different microservices, because you don't want to have the encryption overhead. And at server-server connection, you don't have the limit of 6 connections that browsers impose. So the whole problem of head-of-line blocking is not really there. And you don't do caching on that layer usually anyway. So it's not worth spinning, generating your own certificates just to have HTTP2 for server-to-server communication.
So I was just thinking about, like, to extend on this, like your typical, not like the infrastructure as a service places like Amazon and such, but your common hosting places like Heroku. Did a quick little web search, and turns out that Heroku, at least at the current time, does not support SPDY or HTTP2. How, as a developer, should I use that as a criteria for where to host my apps?
I'm actually really sad that Heroku did not add support for HTTP2 still, because they have been asking for, I want to say, almost 2 years now, if not longer, and it's still not happening. I find it a little bit weird. For me, it would be a criteria at this point, because I know with other similar services, you do get HTTP2. But as I just said, if you are committed to Heroku, and they do have a really nice service, I have to admit that, then you can probably get along with Cloudflare for now. Although I'm not sure how dynamic you can be if you want to do push over Cloudflare. I think you can do it with HTTP link headers, which are then transformed by Cloudflare into pushes. But I have not tried that out, so I'm not sure how reliable or performant it is. But at this point, I would say that the performance gains are so big, and especially for the long tail of users, that HTTP2 should become a very big criterion on your list for choosing where and how to host.
Huh. Interesting.
I guess I'll go ahead and ask you. I'm looking at your doc, and you have a bullet point about local development. Was there something specific that you wanted to share about that?
Oh, yeah. So local development is currently, is a little bit painful, because, as I said, HTTP2 is always encrypted. So what that means is that you will need a TLS certificate for localhost, which you can't get anywhere. So what you would have to do is you would have to bust out your OpenSSL command line tool, generate a self-signed certificate yourself, use that, and then realize that your browser is going to complain about a self-signed certificate, and you have to click through the I accept this security exception kind of dialogue until you can finally start developing with a certificate locally. And that's really, really annoying. And so what I did is I sat down a while ago and I wrote a tool called Simple HTTP2 Server, which is very much inspired by Python's Simple HTTP Server, which is, I think, very popular amongst web developers, because you just started with Python-m Simple HTTP Server to spawn a web server that serves the current directory that you're in. So to do like little hacky things, that's a command of news, but I wanted to have the same thing for HTTP2. And that is exactly what it does. I wrote it in Go because that would allow me to basically just distribute binaries around, which people could just download and use. And that tool does all this certificate generation shenanigans for you. So basically, you just type the command and you have your web server. And that has been proven to be really, really useful, because it actually allows you to test out the performance gains locally with DevTools network throttling to see what the impact is. I also added support for push. So if you want to play around with that, there's a way to add a little config file which specifies basically if a request for index HTML comes in, push these resources. If a request for /about.html comes in, push these, and so on and so forth. And that is basically just showed me that this is a big developer pain point. So I've been talking to the Chrome team, and it is still ongoing, that right now, which is really annoying. If you do that, it kind of works. So it actually works. You can just start the web server, go to the local URL. You still have to do the security exception, and that's not going to go away because it is a security exception, and start developing. But what doesn't work is doing service workers, because apparently the installation process or the registration process of the service worker is a somewhat separate process. So the service worker is kind of asking to, again, get an exception for the security error there, but you don't see any dialogue, so you can't click it. So therefore, it just fails. And that's super annoying. So right now, you have to start Chrome with a command line flag, and that's hopefully going to change soon. I'm working on that. But I just found it super eye-opening to see how a simple requirement like that could basically break all assumptions and make local development really painful. So I try to encourage people to download and try out simple HTTP server. Just use their, for example, blog, serve it locally with the old Python simple HTTP server, throttle yourself to like 3G, something like that, and watch the loading time, and then switch over to the simple HTTP2 server, do the same thing, and see how it just is, on average, just faster. And that if you experience it firsthand, it should hopefully be pretty convincing that at least your static assets, if not all of it, should be on HTTP2.
Now, what about like, sorry, Cory, didn't mean to cut you off.
Go ahead, Joe.
What about like just implementation? Let's say I've been building something and I've already got it up and running somewhere, and I decide, all right, I want to switch my web server and make it support HTTP2. Is there some kind of a reasonable time like I can expect to say, all right, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to read about how to get this all done. I'm going to get it done, and by the time I'm totally done and have it deployed on a, are we talking like, is it a day's worth of work? Is it a week's worth of work? How long can most people expect to if they want to devote and say, we're going to put HTTP2 on we're going to support HTTP2?
So if you have your own cluster, whatever kind of setup, I actually have a blog post, I just remembered, where I try to have an explanation how to enable HTTP2 on all the major setups, Nginx, Apache 2, Cloud Platform, AWS, which I don't think I have updated yet. But all these things I listed there. If you use a language package, like if you use Node HTTP, or if you use the Go web server, I explained those as well, what you need to do to get the certificate in there and to switch it over to HTTP2. Most of them should be up and running in a matter of a few hours. It's probably going to take more time to make sure that it's, production ready and does fail over and all these kind of things. But if you just want to switch your code website from HTTP to HTTP2 without actually changing or removing bundling, all these kind of things, which is a very valid first step to just switch to the new protocol, it should already make your website faster. I would like to say that it should be very well done within a day. People are probably going to scold me for that, but I'm going to stand by just to make people curious and try it out.
Yeah, Joe actually took my question, so I was thinking of a different one. You win, Joe.
So what's tough about this subject is that it's not about so much like coding, right? It's like infrastructure.
Are you looking to expand your skills in mobile development? Have an idea for the next Angry Birds app? Then you need to check out iOS Remote Conf, produced by the same team that brings you your favorite devchat.tv podcasts like Ruby Rogues and iFreaks. Join us for 2 days of jam-packed fun and learning streamed to you live May 17th and 18th. Go check it out at iosremoteconf.com.
So what's tough about this subject is that it's not about so much like coding, right? It's like infrastructure.
Yeah.
Lots of configuration.
Yeah. So it's almost like for me, I keep thinking about this like, this sounds really cool. I need to tell somebody to make this happen. Right? I don't know if I want to spend all my time doing it.
No, I have realized that doing the whole maintenance backend configuration thing is not something I would necessarily enjoy. But maybe something that would spike your interest. A lot of people have asked if with push that WebSockets are obsolete, which I found a very interesting question. At the start, I was actually convinced that would be the case, that once you have push, you don't need WebSockets anymore because you can just do requests as the one direction and you can just push for the other direction. And that's kind of how you could do bidirectional on-demand communication and therefore no need for WebSockets. And that would be kind of cool because WebSockets are a different protocol and therefore an additional connection. And it sounded very interesting. And after I at first believed that, and actually even had it in my talk at CDS, where I said maybe WebSockets will be obsolete, who knows? I am now exactly on the opposite side, saying no, WebSockets still have a very valid use case and are probably here to stay. And I should probably expand on that because what the reason is basically that while a push is kind of forcing data from the server to the client, it is always a request together with a response. So it's not just pushing a response to the client because then the client wouldn't know what that response is for, but it pushes a request and a response together. And so the client has this pair, and whenever the app in whatever way fires up a request that matches this request that has been pushed, the response can be returned. If the request doesn't match, it will go to the network and everything will happen as usual. And if this pushed response never gets used, it will just get dropped and not land in the cache. And the second thing is that most, not only proxies, but basically every node in between your, let's say, mobile phone and the server have in the meantime been usually configured to give WebSockets different treatment than normal HTTP packets, which means they are very low. They manage to get very low latency and sometimes even higher priority, and therefore WebSockets are much more low latency and a better use case for real-time communication. And you don't have the overhead of headers, which you in WebSockets you probably don't need. You just want to push a payload, some kind of data object, over to the client, and not worry about pushing headers back and forth every time.
Are there features of JavaScript or features of maybe particular frameworks that this is going to replace? So maybe we don't need, I don't know, I'm just throwing something out there, maybe observables or promises or something like that where, you know, it changes the dynamics of how those requests are made. And so, you know, hey, whatever. I know that's a poor example because that's dealing with asynchronous calls, but
I know, but I know what you're getting at. And I think by design, on the surface level, it really shouldn't. Like everything should stay the same. It should be just a protocol layer change without any changes without any necessary changes. Mm-hmm. What I could see happening though is that cookies could get potentially used more than they are now. So one of the things that I didn't mention so far is that HTTP2 also has a new compression for headers. So I guess you all know that usually when you head to a web server, you usually enable gzip compression because it's a lossless compression. So there's basically no downside, and you make the amount of data that needs to get transferred smaller, which is yay, that's good. But one of the things that never compressed, even with gzip, were the headers. So gzip compression only applies to the content, not to the headers of the request or the response. Those were always plain text. And that meant that if you had lots of cookies or lots of custom headers, those would just be data on top of your request or response that had to get transferred. And cookies would have to get transferred every time, which is why right now there is the best practice of having a specific subdomain that has cookies, and you said the content should not be on that subdomain, so that you don't send along your cookies for every static image that you grab. HTTP2, however, added a compression called HPAG, which compresses headers. And the cool thing about that is because now all requests share a connection that it's not just compressing them like gzip, but it can also reference headers from earlier requests. So for example, if you have a cookie, like an extremely long session ID, or maybe you even encode your entire session into a cookie, it will only get sent once, because from there on in, the compressor can say, just reuse the same header from like 3 requests ago. It's still the same value, which is super cool, because I know that back then when I got started with web server development in Go, that there was a module that would basically not give you a session ID, but encode or encrypt rather the entire user session into a cookie. So it's basically a JSON object which had like the username and the current settings and whatnot in the cookie, would encrypt it with a server-side key and put it in a cookie. And of course, they warned back then that this would not be a good idea, because that cookie would be sent on every request. But now it would actually be different, or it could be different, whereas like, actually, that's not even that bad anymore. So I'm speculating here, but I could see that actually change, that frameworks are more liberal in offering cookie-based sessions. It's just one example.
Very interesting.
Another thing I just realized that I mentioned earlier, and I thought I should expand on, is Purple, which is something that frameworks should offer. And I think Polymer is doing that right now with a command line tool. And that is a design pattern that takes advantage of HTTP2 push in combination with service workers. So that's like the ultimate leading edge combination, but it actually is so good when it comes to loading performance. So what that does is, on the one hand, it gives you guidance on how you should structure your bundling. So bundling should still maybe be a thing, because just as a logical unit, basically bundling all the code together that you need for your main app view, and then have a different bundle for everything you need about your about view, or the typical, if you think in like views, it might make sense to bundle them. Not necessarily, but it might make sense. And actually Purple is an acronym. So it stands for push, render, preload, and lazy load. And that's basically the list of priority that you have to work through. So the first thing is to push, and that can stand for HTTP2 push, but it can also stand for any other means of pushing data to the client. So it could be a link preload header, for example, but push is probably the highest performing solution you can currently use. So with the index HTML, you should push everything that you need to render, because you want to be able to render without having additional runtime trips. And that means that you should be able to be on screen in under a second, even on a flaky 3G network where you just have one round trip. And then when the response of the index HTML returns, you also get the response for all the other things that you need so the client can start rendering. And we have found out that if an app renders that fast, the user is much more likely to stay. And that's usually what we're all striving for. So you want to push and you want to render. And then you want to preload the things that are probably needed to be responsive for the next user interaction. So you want to push the data to render the sidebar, but then you want to prefetch the code that is needed to be actually interactive with the sidebar, because that's not needed for the first render, but it's needed right after. And everything else should be lazy loaded. Once you actually navigate to a different page, then you start loading that bit, and then the whole Purple cycle starts over again. And service worker comes in because you probably only want push on the first load. And afterwards, the request for index HTML is going to be intercepted by the service worker, and you probably have everything cached already, so you don't need the server to actually push anything because you have it all locally. But you can do a lot of the pushing work, so to speak, locally by prefetching in the service worker. But that was a long story to basically say, I think this Purple pattern is what frameworks are going to adapt and hopefully allow developers to, or help them structure their app in a way in different sections that can be pushed and prefetched according to the Purple pattern to, in a natural way, achieve very high loading performance. And one example that Polymer has is the Polymer shop example, which is just mind-blowing in terms of how fast it loads, even over a very slow and flaky connection. So if someone hasn't seen it, I encourage to take a look at the experience, open DevTools, look at the timeline, and also look at the source code, and just play around with it a little bit, because it actually shows how fast the web can be, and it's something that people need to be aware of to actually realize how slow most other websites are nowadays.
And for anybody listening, if you just type PRPL into Google, the first hit is what you're looking for there for more reading. This is definitely something worth reading about. I know Addie has a good talk on this topic as well.
And I.O. is coming up in 2 weeks. I'm pretty sure we're going to have more content then for that as well. But yeah, I should have mentioned it's actually PRPL and just pronounced purple. And we do have some articles on it out there, and a talk by Eddie, and I think a talk also by Alice Russell. Definitely worth watching. I think it's going to be one of the more common patterns in the coming year.
So here's kind of a larger question. This is something that I'm struggling with a lot. A lot of us as developers, as our careers go on, we're being forced to become more and more specialists in more narrow areas just because there's so much to know in these given areas. And I'm thinking about even more right now I'm somebody who's front end focused, but I don't feel like I have the time to dive deep into as deep into performance as I'd like to. And I think the conversation we're ultimately having here is largely about performance. I think you agree that's the primary benefit of HTTP 2, although there are some other obviously security benefits because you're being forced to do the right thing there. Do you think that whose responsibility is it at an organization to get people on HTTP 2? Do you see this as a DevOps responsibility? Do you see it as a front-end developer's responsibility to push this? Where are you seeing companies getting the inertia to make these sorts of changes? And when we talk about Purple too, now Purple I feel like is more obviously UI, but this thing with HTTP 2, who's making it happen? Who do you think should be driving this?
So the people who actually literally make it happen would probably be DevOps, because they have to put it to flick the switch. But I feel like the people who have to apply the pressure to their reporting chain, I like however it works in your startup / company, the main concern that you should be after is user experience. Make this website load fast. Make this web app feel like an actual app and be snappy and be there immediately. And to achieve that, you need HTTP 2, because even with link preload, you can do a good job of Purple, but H2 will do a much better job of Purple. So when you're a front app dev and you're trying to do the Purple pattern and try to be as mindful as you can about, being frugal, just requesting the resource that you really need to get on screen as fast as possible, and then H2 standing in the way of being able to getting the best performance out of that, that's where you need to apply the pressure to your DevOps or to your manager or whatever to say, we need to enable this so that we can be better at this. It's hard, I think. I can't really give a generic answer here, but if you look at it holistically or just from the end user perspective, really, the data that's out there, multiple people have run experiments with HTTP 2 just on CDNs have done it. The New York Times, I think, have done it, published the data as well. And the data just speaks unanimously in favor of doing it. And that should really be enough to just be like, everybody says it is a good idea. It will give us performance for free. So we need to do it.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people understand the benefits. I think the interesting thing is this has a lot of the same problem as some other things that are struggling to gain broad adoption quickly. I look at things like GraphQL, for instance, that lots of people are excited about. But the reason that GraphQL isn't gaining adoption as quickly is the people that are most excited about it are front-end developers. But to actually implement it, you have to get other people involved on the back end, and there seems to often be this separation. So I think some of the same things happening here, because I'm looking at myself. I'm not in a huge company. I'm working at a company about 500 people, but nonetheless, I have a lot of power to do basically whatever I want on the front end. I have a lot of autonomy there. But the minute that I have to move back to the servers, it becomes put in a request, lots of meetings, lots of justifications. What are the risks of this? What are the performance implications? So I think what do you feel like is the best way to justify these things to to DevOps, because the hard thing is DevOps really has very little incentive to be that excited about this because they don't have the incentive to worry about performance in the same way that a front-end developer does. And really, it's the front-end developer that gets to say, hey, boss, look, I accomplished this awesome thing, whereas the DevOps person is unlikely to put this on their, hey, look at this great thing I accomplished list. So
yeah,
I guess
see what you're getting at.
I guess to some degree it comes down to having the conversation that you and I are having here, where to some degree you have to do the sales pitch with DevOps to justify this work above all the other things that are keeping them very busy.
Yeah. So I guess giving it a high priority, that is probably the tough bit. In terms of what can go wrong, it never is the ideal world, but theoretically, it should just work. It should work transparently. It should literally be a configuration switch, like one variable in your Nginx configuration, provided you already have HTTPS set up, and all good citizens usually do. And then it should just work, and nothing should change in terms of how the servers operate and how they behave. I know that's probably not very realistic, at least 100% of the time, but that's how you should start. And I guess you could start with an A/B setup where you just start sending 5-10% of your traffic to the new HTTP2 version if you're worried about this kind of stuff. Again, the driving factor should be the motivation behind it should be that it makes your user's experience much better. It should load faster, and I've seen multiple studies where it's being said that faster load times correlate with more conversion, whatever you're trying to convert for. I think Amazon actually said most famously that 100 milliseconds in load time meant a 30% drop off in sales or something along those lines. Don't quote me on that. I would have to look it up. But load time usually means literally money in the bank. And that should be a very good argument to do it.
Totally agree. Yeah, get to the bottom line. So do you have, in your experience, have there been any big surprises where somebody switched over to HTTP2, they thought it'd be easy, and it turned out they overlooked this particular thing? Other than HTTPS being the obvious, hey, you needed to get that on first, is there any other big stumbling blocks that people consistently hit?
I'm actually not asked it. I have never asked that question because it has not happened. So the actual answer is right now, no, I have not heard of any bigger problems with this. Because as I said, it is just a protocol change. It should work transparently. All the files are sent back and forth. So it should definitely not break your app. Mm-hmm. In terms of CPU cycles, it should be the same. Oh, actually, one interesting stat that I heard is that even if you have an HTTP setup, so without TLS, some people were concerned that going to HTTP2 would be too expensive, would put strain on the servers because now they have the encryption there. Even then, the website would still load faster because the speed up that HTTP provides with removing head-of-line blocking and all these things more than makes up for the additional overhead of encryption.
And it does that because effectively each connection is resolved more quickly?
Well, you only have one connection at this point.
Okay.
So it only has to build up one connection, and then everything is sent over that connection, which also means that bandwidth is usually utilized much more efficiently than the HTTP1 counterpart.
Gotcha.
One thing that I'm curious about too is, I've done back end and front end. The question is, does this tend to affect the performance of the back end? I mean, we've talked a lot about front end performance, but what about back end performance?
So I don't have any hard numbers on this, but I mentioned before that in my mind, at least, you should terminate HTTP2 on the load balancer. So if your app actually is more than a single server setup, which I have to assume right now because everything else is probably going to be fine. So something that you can scale out horizontally usually has a load balancer in front. And behind the load balancer towards your individual microservices, you would speak HTTP1, while towards the client, you would use HTTP2. So that would mean that the strain on the microservices would would be the same or would only be higher in so far, and that you'd be able to get more visitors, or you would have more visitors, or just handle more at the same time. If you have a single server setup, then I don't have any numbers. I would assume that there would be a little bit more strain because yes, now you have to do encryption, but I think like in terms of loading performance, it would be better, but maybe a little bit more strain, just like adding TLS. I don't think that the header compression or the protocol itself would increase the load, specifically also because the protocol is now binary, so there's no text parsing, and I would think that the engineers made the parsing more efficient than the old text-based version. But that is now, again, speculation on my part. Probably something I should look into. It's a very interesting question.
This episode is sponsored by Hired.com. Are you searching for a new job? That can be stressful, scary, and time-consuming. Pushy recruiters try to sell you on roles you don't actually want, and the job boards make you feel like you're throwing your resume into a black hole, never to be seen again. And sometimes you go all the way through the interview process just to find out at the very end that the salary, offer, or company culture doesn't match what you're looking for. Hired is the world's most intelligent talent matching platform for full-time and contract opportunities in engineering, development, design, product management, data science, sales, and marketing. We make your job search faster, focused, and stress-free. Instead of endlessly applying to companies and hoping for the best, Hired puts you in control of when and how you connect with compelling new opportunities. After completing one simple application, top employers apply to hire you, and on Hired you receive personal interview requests and upfront salary information so you can make informed decisions about what opportunities to pursue over a condensed timeline. Hired offers access to more than 4,000 innovative employers, including big brand names like Facebook and smaller emerging startups. The size and type of company you want to connect with is totally up to you. And we help you find new opportunities in 17 major cities in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. Open to relocation? Let them know. Your privacy and autonomy in your job search is of utmost importance. And if you go check them out at the show's link, that's hire.com/JavaScriptJabber, you can get double the hiring bonus that they offer. That's $600 instead of $300. So go check them out at hire.com/JavaScriptJabber today.
Than the old text-based version. But that is now, again, speculation on my part. Probably something I should look into. It's a very interesting question.
All right. Well, I've got to get ready for another podcast, so I'm going to push us toward picks. Is there anything else that we absolutely should cover, though, before we get to picks, or have we covered pretty much everything that we need to?
I think we're good. I'm trying to remember what I put in the doc, but I think we covered everything that I thought was important.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and do some picks then. Aimee, do you want to start us off with picks?
Yep. So since I wasn't here last week, this is one that I wanted to share. It's like a little game. I know there's a Flexbox game a while back, but this is for CSS Grid that's coming out, and it looks pretty cool. And then my other pick is an International JavaScript Conference. It's in October in Munich, Germany. I'm super excited that I'm going to be speaking there. So if you feel like taking a trip to Germany to learn more about JavaScript, I would highly recommend going. And I'll put a link for both those things in the show notes. That's it for me.
Joe, what are your picks?
Can I pick something that I haven't seen yet? Guardians of the Galaxy comes out Thursday night, and how can I not pick that? Like, it's volume 2. You should go and see it. Of course, it'll be out by the time people hear this. So I hope that I really don't pick something bad. I can't imagine it's bad. Marvel's done such a great job with movies. I think that they deserve the benefit of the doubt. So I'm going to pick Guardians of the Galaxy, even though I haven't seen it. It's going on.
Is that the new Superwoman? What's the new Superwoman? That's just Superwoman.
Oh, yeah. Aimee, come on. That's DC, not Marvel.
I thought I'm a girl.
That's not.
There is a new Wonder Woman coming out, I think.
There are so many women that know way more about this than I do.
Sorry. Well,
okay, so let me give you a primer here, Aimee.
You cut that part out.
Wonder Woman is DC.
I thought DC and Marvel were the same thing.
No, DC and Marvel are different, and Guardians of the Galaxy is Marvel.
Okay, can we seriously cut this out? Because I'm going to hate like, not kidding. Like, really? I'm not kidding.
Okay.
I'm not kidding.
But I'm going to remember this forever.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm a figure skating ballerina. I don't know this stuff.
All right, Joe, pick it again.
All right, so I want to pick Guardians of the Galaxy coming out on Thursday night. I haven't seen it yet, but I feel like Marvel has done, and Disney, of course, have done such a great job with the Marvel movies as a whole that we could definitely trust that it's going to be a good, fun movie. Unlike DC, an entirely different thing, all of their movies so far have sucked. And Wonder Woman looks like it might not suck, and I really hope it doesn't suck, but it's probably going to suck. So that's my pick. Guardians of the Galaxy.
All right. I'm going to jump in here with a couple of picks. The first one is something that my business coach introduced me to. And funny enough, it's actually more along the lines of a interpersonal thing. And I had heard of this before, but I didn't realize that there was a free survey that you could take that would give you information on this. But I had heard of the 5 love languages, but I had never actually dug into it more than that. And,
that's good stuff. Yeah,
and I was talking to her because my wife is stressed to the max, and I'm like, what can I do? And she's like, well, you need to take this, this profile, and then you need to have her take it because you don't know what her love language is. And I'm like, no. So I just took it. And then I had her take it. And what's funny is that I thought for sure I was going to come down with I think one of them's affectionate touching or something, like holding hands and stuff. And that was the 4th one for me. So anyway, it was and then I thought about it because my major love language is quality time. And I started thinking about that, and I was like, yeah, the people I feel like care about me the most are the people that I wind up spending quality time with the most. And so anyway, it also explains why I do some of the things I do. So it was very, very interesting. And I'm super happy about that and what I learned there. And then one other thing that I'm going to pick, and this is a tool that this is like my 3rd CRM in as many months. But I'm switching everything over to a tool called BlueTick. It's bluetick.io. It's currently in beta. And it actually, I had actually given up on CRMs, and I was looking at, what do I want? Like, how would I design my own CRM? And it's BlueTick. So I'm super happy about it. It doesn't have all the features I want yet, but it's in beta. And it does have most of the features I want, the critical ones. So anyway, I'm really digging it. Bluetick.io. It's actually done by a friend of mine, Mike Tabor. And I think the reason why it fits so well for that is that he basically got the idea to build it because he was putting together things for MicroConf, which is a business conference. And so he needed the kind of follow-up you need to do things like land sponsors and line up speakers. And if that sounds familiar at all, that's a lot of what I do for the podcasts is, line up guests and follow up. So anyway, I'm really, really liking that. And I'm super happy with it. And then one last pick, and this is something that I've been doing just to kind of unwind. And this is a game that's been out for a while, and I've had for a while, and I've beat several times. But I'm replaying Diablo 3, and I'm really enjoying it. So
I just started the same thing.
I mean, you just run around and whack monsters. And what's frustrating to me is that I created a new character, and the highest I can set him is to hard. And yeah, I'm just... I don't even come close to dying. It's kind of anyway. But anyway, so I'm really enjoying it. And so if you want to hop on and go play multiplayer or something like that, let me know. My username is CMaxW, the same as my Twitter handle, CMAXW. So anyway, I'm happy to connect with anybody on there. Surma, what are your picks?
Okay, so I have 2 picks, and the first one is a little bit vague, but my first pick is JavaScript modules, because we have now reached the point where, at least behind the flag, all major browsers have support for them, and I'm so excited about it. We can now, after I don't know how many years of ES 2015, we can use the import statement and actually import additional files and have them load, and don't have to resort to other implementations of module loaders. And I just want to start playing around with that and see what it offers in terms of ergonomics, how it's going to change how we structure apps, and how it's going to play together with HTTP2 as well. And I think it's just super exciting that we can now explore that territory of things that I have gotten that question so often on why were modules in ES 2015, but no one implemented, and you always had to clarify it was only the syntax, not actually the loading was not part of ES 2015, which really didn't make sense. But finally, slowly, we are rectifying that. And I think only Node is still actually working on the implementation. Everybody else has it shipped behind the flag. And I think it's going to be good. It's going to be really interesting. And my second pick is a game as well, which I played it a long time ago, just a little bit, found it boring. And for some reason, I tried it out again, and now I'm completely addicted. And it's Factorio, where you build. Your job is to build a factory where you start mining and turning those into resources. You mine iron ore, turn into iron plates, and you can turn those into conveyor belts and then automate the entire factory and bootstrap yourself up to the point where you reach the goal of the game, which is to launch a rocket into space with a satellite. And that sounds kind of dull, but it is amazing, especially if you are somewhat like a optimization and performance geek like I am, where you actually obsess over the items per second going over the conveyor belt and how many factories you need to fully satisfy that throughput and optimize everything and have like really nice symmetric layouts. It's a great game to jump into for 15, 20 minutes just to switch off your brain. It's a little bit like Diablo 3, but more on the constructive side in terms of mind numbingness. But I actually start drawing parallels to how a browser works to Factorio, like how my resources are, my budget to ship a frame, and I have to give everything in time to maximize throughput to actually be at 60 frames per second. It's nerdy, I know, but it really speaks to me. And if anyone wants to have a non-expensive game to play in between with a very active and very nice community around it, I can only recommend Factorio.
Very cool. If people want to follow what you're doing or get the latest news on HTTP2, what are some good resources for that?
I have to admit, I mostly broadcast my stuff over Twitter, where I'm Das Surma, DAS Surma. Very happy to keep everyone up to date on HTTP2 or answer questions. Not only HTTP2, but also loading performance in general and web app performance in general. Very happy to help out there. It's always interesting to me, so hit me up.
All right. Well, thank you for coming, Surma. We're going to go ahead and wrap this one up, and we'll catch everyone next week.
Thank you very much.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.